Reading this morning come from Psalms 127, 3 through 5. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate.
I think of all the holidays that we have throughout the course of the year, at the top of my list anyway, would have to be the Thanksgiving celebration we just enjoyed. I trust that it was well for you and for your family. I'm sure we all ate more than we should have eaten. Probably have some regrets. Some of us wearing older suits today so we can fit in them and not be so uncomfortable and so on and so forth. For what are you thankful this year? I thought about that when we were having celebration, eating together with my in-laws in Tennessee. I thought about many things. Much of it's the kind of thing we take for granted. I'm thankful that my kidneys work, that my lungs and heart works. I'm thankful that my pancreas works. A lot of people suffer, and they suffer in very silent ways we're not aware of because their body parts are not functioning as they should. We don't know how to appreciate these things until they stop working properly or stop working at all, and then we're desperate for prayers and for concern. I don't know about you, but I'm thankful that for the most part, head accepted, that my body works and functions fairly normally. I'm thankful for the many spiritual blessings that we have. What a tremendous song we just sang. As we were expressing in that song the idea that we simply do not know, it's beyond our comprehension, how much it truly cost heaven to allow Christ to come into the world, to be one of us, to live as a man, to die a horrible death for us, and to be resurrected the third day by the power of God, to provide us with hope for our own glorious resurrection one day. For this, we are eternally grateful, and indeed should be. I'm thankful for the Bible. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable. How foolish it is for one to possess the Scriptures and not avail themselves to a serious, in-depth, and regular, systematic study of the same. How we rob ourselves of great wisdom and understanding because the Bible clearly is a gift from God for which we should be thankful. I'm thankful for this congregation of God's people. Thankful to be a member here. Been here for many years, and I'm very thankful for the years that I've been here and for the knowledge I have of each and every one of you and for those that are yet to come our way. I'm so thankful that God allows me the opportunity to serve here in this congregation, to meet new people from time to time, to have new ones come and extend their fellowship to us from time to time. These things are a great blessing that often we fail to take notice of. But to be honest with you, when I thought about the great benefit there is in being a citizen of this country, I know there are a lot of people that are ungrateful and spoiled who take the great, unprecedented freedoms and opportunities that we have as citizens of this country to denigrate this country, disrespect its flag. They are sad individuals, in my opinion. They're only hurting themselves. As they seek to disrespect our nation, they're really littling and belittling themselves in the eyes of a grateful nation, grateful that God has blessed us. But again, this year, as I thought about those things that I'm most thankful for, the thing that came to my mind more than others, and probably for good reason, are the sweet children that God has blessed me with. I don't think we often pause to take time to be thankful for our children as we should. Brother Waddell, you're so right. He has said so many times when he's dodging the children running through the aisles, and I say something smart, as I typically will, yelling at the parents or whatever, he will say to me, as kind as he knows how, we have to be thankful for our children because it proves to us that God hasn't given up on us yet. I agree with you, Brother Waddell. Exactly right. I love children. I love babies in particular. I have to be honest with you, the older I get, the less patient, however, I find myself with them, particularly when there's a room full of them, and some of them are lighting the curtains on fire, and some of them are knocking holes in the wall, and some of them are knocking our elderly over and climbing over the pews, and you want to take the parents and wring their necks, and you're wondering, what are you paying attention to or not? It can be a little aggravating at times and unnerving. And the older you get, you'll understand that. You just can't handle it as well as you once did. My mother's often said God gave babies to young people for a reason. Indeed, he did. But with those things said, we cannot ignore the tremendous blessing we have with our precious children in our midst. I want you to think about the blessing they are. Number one, when I think of how my children have blessed me, they've blessed me because they've forced me to take a closer look at myself. I'll never, long as I live, forget the morning that Regina woke me up. And she quietly whispered to me, "We're going to have a baby." I spent the rest of that day knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt I was going to have a son. The next week at church, I announced, going to have a son. People thought I was crazy. But I was thankful to be blessed with a son. But from the moment I learned that I was going to have a child, something happened to me. And I'm being honest about this. I don't know how to explain it other than something, it's like it clicks in your brain. It's like a switch that's flipped in your mind. It's like, wait a minute, this is no longer about me anymore. And from that moment, I realized that as a man, of course a husband, soon to be a father, I realized that everything I did, every decision I made, every word I spoke, every action I took was going to be observed. And until my children were about 20 or so, I was very careful to be on my P's and Q's. I don't care so much anymore. It's their fault now, their problem. They have to deal with it. But when they were growing up in my house, and of course, I'm not trying to suggest that I always made the right choices, that I always did the right thing. Far from it. But I was always, at every moment, mindful. Everything I do, they're paying attention to. My grandchildren do the same thing. I was on my lawnmower this past summer, and Arthur was running through the yard. I was trying to wave him away. And he stopped and just looked at me. And I smiled, and I did that number. And he went on his merry way. I didn't think anything of it. A couple of days later, I went up on the front porch of their house to get something or say something. And Arthur was running past me. And I said, "Hey, watch it, punk." And I turned around to look, and he stopped, looked at me, smiled, and went. I thought, he notices everything that you do and say, even stuff you don't. I thought, where did he get that? Wait a minute, I just did that today on the lawn. There's something about having a child that changes. That, brethren, is a blessing. They bring us joy beyond description as they mature. I don't know what it is, but when you see a child taking their first steps or uttering that first word, of course, mine have always been granddaddy. daddy, as plain as day. Their first word. Not. But to hear those first words, usually mama or daddy or papa, if you were privileged to be named such. But, those are names that other people have that when you hear children utter them for the first time, you're very grateful to hear it. It's exciting. And then as you get older, you have the blessing of those children to be your best friend, your companion, your confidant, your help, your aid. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 7, the Bible tells us something regarding the Israelites as they were enslaved in Egypt that teaches a powerful lesson about children and the great blessing that they are. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. Now, there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Pharaoh was concerned, and rightly so. There's an army of people rising up in our own border. We are presently, this day, this hour, embroiled in a mighty civil war. We don't always speak about it that way. Sometimes we call it a cultural war. Sometimes we call it the battle of ideas. You can call it whatever you want to. We are a divided nation. And it's not just this nation, it's all of Western society, really. That's divided along very stark contrasting lines. You have secular humanism, and you have Christianity with two competing points of view. Now here's something I want you to think about. As we think about the future of our nation, the future of Western society, and the values and culture that will come in days to come, what will that future look like? Well, we can say on one hand that we're grateful and thankful that as Christians, we're having most of the babies and the secular humanists aren't. And the reason the secular humanists aren't, for the most part, number one, they're not getting married. Number two, they're homosexuals. Or number three, they're murdering their offspring in the name of choice. All three things are horribly tragic. But they're not having babies. They're not reproducing. We might argue, well, that's a good thing. And so we're having all the babies and they're not. And so like Pharaoh, they should be afraid of us. And they are afraid of us. And yes, they are aware of the threat our children pose to their worldview. And yes, they have taken measures to see to it that our children are not a threat. You say, well, they haven't enslaved them. Oh, but haven't they? Have you thought about what's happening and why it's happening in public education? I mean, we are truly burying our heads in the sand if we are unaware or ignorant of the battle of ideas that's taking place in public education. For the most part, not in every case, but for the most part, secular humanists dominate the field of study in our public schools. And they are seeking to indoctrinate our children. You know what's tragic about that? We house them, we feed them, we spank them. We give them all the things they need, and the government undermines their minds and hearts and steals them away from us and from God and from a great future that could possibly be ours. Make no mistake about it, we are engaged in a serious battle and struggle for the hearts and minds of our children. We need to be aware of that. If we're not, we're seriously going to lose in this struggle. But it's not just our worldview and culture that we should be concerned with as far as children are concerned and the benefit they can potentially provide us. Jacqueline Cawson is an economist who has some interesting things to say about children. I want to just share with you her words. With a plague like the 14th century Black Death, maybe a third of Europe died, but it took the elderly as well as the young. But this plunging fertility takes only the young. She's referring to the birth rate in Western society generally. It's way down from what it was just a few decades ago. She continues, a couple still has parents and grandparents to support directly or through their taxes. Since they've got fewer or no siblings to share that burden, having children seems even more unaffordable. So how do you dig your way out of a hole like a shrinking population? This is one of those downsides to having fewer children that most people never really stop to think about. Another sociologist asked this question. Do you realize that the low birth rate in Western democracies, which is occurring as a result of children being viewed as an infringement on a free lifestyle, is already making its mark? As the birth rate drops, pension funds, both public and private, also begin to diminish. In the next decade and beyond, these shifting demographics are threatening the retirement funds of future retirees. Treating children as a bother is already threatening to cause acute economic problems in the future. Though it is prudent to not have more children than we're able to support, the Western world's declining birth rate, which is more about accommodating selfish interest, is producing grave geopolitical consequences. Now let's bring it home to America. You hear it almost every time there's an election. We've got to make Social Security solve. We've got to do something to save Social Security. Why is Social Security always front and center at almost every campaign, particularly for Congress? There's a generation of people that are retiring. We call them the baby boomers. There are not enough millennials entering the workforce to support, through their taxes, the Social Security system that will go bankrupt, according to most economists, in a few years if something doesn't radically change. Unfortunately, there's not an easy solution to any of these problems because we've been killing our children in the name of abortion. And we're having fewer of our children because we consider them to be a bother and inconvenient. We're robbing ourselves of the joy and benefits of children in the name of freedom, and in the process, robbing ourselves of freedom and joy. How tragic is this commentary on Western society? What we seem to have forgotten is that the way to provide for our security and pass on our worldview is to listen to God. What did God say? Be fruitful and multiply. I'll say this. We simply cannot place a price tag on the value of our children. How much are your children worth to you? How much would you take for your grandchildren? You say, well, preacher, that's a ridiculous question. My children are priceless. Indeed, they are. How do you treat this priceless treasure? You go to Fort Knox, try to get in, and try to look at the gold. You won't have any success. It's well guarded. In fact, so well guarded that people have actually asked out loud, is the gold really there? Because very few people have actually had the privilege of seeing it. It's so well guarded. Go to any museum where there are priceless works of art and see the measures that are taken to guard those works of art. What are we doing to protect our children and to safeguard their soul? Remember the words of King David, of his own son. Is the young man safe? Have you asked that question about your own children recently? In Ephesians 6 and verse 4, Paul said, "You fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." And in Titus chapter 2, verse 4, teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. Are we raising our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? What about Bible study at home? What about bringing them to Bible study at church? Ron Riedheimer had some very sobering observations. Church leaders all over the nation are concerned about the dropout rate of young people. And well, they should be. It is a tragic thing to see these precious boys and girls who are so thrilled with Bible study as little people grow cold and uninterested in the Lord's work as they grow older. Lately, several congregations have made in-depth studies of the factors leading to youth leaving the church with an eye to learning what might be done to help solve this problem. What do we need? More youth programs, more youth rallies, special teachers. A great central truth has begun to emerge from these studies. Their faithfulness to Jesus doesn't have anything to do with special programs or teachers. It is not dependent on whether they are members of a large congregation or a small one. The single most important factor is their own immediate family. One congregation found that when both parents were faithful to the Lord, and that includes active interest in the local congregation's programs, 93% of the children remained faithful. On the other hand, if only one parent was faithful, the figure dropped to 73%. Where both parents were only marginally active, it fell to 53%. Now comes the shocker. When both parents attended infrequently, 6% of their children remain faithful to the Lord. Elders can do what elders do. Preachers can do what preachers do. Bible class teachers can do what Bible class teachers do. Ultimately, truthfully, not just from this study, but from the Bible itself, we learn that the primary place children learn about God is at home. A preacher, my children are just priceless to me. I wouldn't take $1 billion or more for my children. Well, what are we doing to safeguard our children? Are we teaching them to sacrifice for the Lord monetarily? I can't answer for you. I have to wonder when I see us below budget over and over and over again. What are we telling our children? Are we teaching them to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength through obedience to His Word? Are we teaching them that church attendance, Bible class attendance is important, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as a manner of some is, Hebrews 10:25? Are we teaching them this? Are we challenging them to set high goals in their life? You know what the ecclesiastical writer said is certainly pertinent here. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Do our children see that in us? What about what the psalm writer said in the 34th Psalm? Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt His name together. Do our children see us exalting the Lord? What about providing them love? Admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children. I remember growing up, I heard that passage, I don't know how many times read, and I thought to myself, not being disrespectful, but as a child, I thought, why did God waste time in the Bible telling women to love their children? Because all I had to go by was my mother. And that was my understanding of how mothers treat their children. I mean, well, of course, mothers naturally love their children. But as I've grown older and I see the coarseness and the degradation of our culture, the disintegration of our culture, I realize now that in pagan Rome, when Paul was writing these words, it was necessary to teach women what seems natural to us, because it's handed down from generation to generation. What seemed natural to many of us is not so natural, it would seem. And so where are women going to learn? Well, they need to learn at church, with older women in church, teaching younger women. Love your husbands and love your children. To live a godly example before them at all times. You're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. That's not more prevalent than anywhere in your home. I mean, your home is where your children either see your light shining or not. They know you better than anyone. Who's going to teach our children to work and be responsible? If a man would not work, neither should he eat. 2 Thessalonians 3. If a man does not provide for his own, especially they of his own household, he's worse than an infidel, has denied the faith, 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. So where are they going to learn that? Who's going to teach our children to work and be responsible? Who's going to teach them biblical truths to guide them throughout their life? Train up a child in the way he should go, with his mannerism, with his personality, but teach them the way they should go. Oh, yeah. When it comes to things we treasure, things that we hold in high value, we go to great lengths to protect those things. We say our children are priceless. Do our actions say something else? For what are you thankful this year? There's so much to be thankful for. I'm thankful for this opportunity to be here today, this very hour, to share this worship service with you. With all of these children. By the way, isn't this a quiet service? It's almost like the children are absent, or maybe they've been given Benadryl or something. I don't know what's happened to our children, but they're very quiet. And that's a wonderful blessing. I'm thankful for that. It rarely happens. But I am sincerely thankful. Brother Waddell, God has not given up on us yet. What about you? Are you the kind of parent you need to be? Are you teaching your children what you ought to teach them, living before them as you ought to live? Are you subject to heaven's invitation? Can we assist you in any way? If so, please make that need.